knew something was off the moment the email came through. Leadership sync at 9 a.m. mandatory. No agenda, no subject, just that one-liner like it was some casual check-in. Only it wasn't casual, and I wasn't stupid. I showed up 10 minutes early, hair still damp from a rushed shower, coffee in one hand and a half-eaten granola bar in the other. The executive floor was quiet in that funeral home kind of way. Too many doors closed, too many voices whispering behind frosted glass. People avoid eye contact when your execution's scheduled. The room was full when I walked in. I took my usual spot at the end of the table, third chair from the projector, across from finance. No one said a word, not Dana from marketing, not Shiv from legal, not even Ken, who always gave me a we're in this together smirk when things got tense. Today, he just stared at his phone like it had the power to save him. CFO walked in last. Dean Dam Mallory, gray suit like wet cement, that Wall Street deadness behind the eyes, and the smug satisfaction of a man who's never fixed a single broken process, but somehow owns the whiteboard. He adjusted his cufflinks like this was his damn coronation. He opened with a smile. One of those brittle, PR-trained ones that says, "This is going to hurt, but I'll enjoy watching." As we move into Q4, initiating a strategic restructuring. A pivot, if you will, to align our leadership with market realities. I already knew. I didn't blink. Dean glanced down at his printed notes. Yes, printed, because God forbid he trust a screen like the rest of us mortals, and continued. Effective today, we'll be sunsetting the VP of Infrastructure position. Our roadmap requires agile, lean-forward execution from leaders who operate not on instinct, but precision. Sentiment is not a strategy. We need sharks. Then he looked straight at me and said it. Ellie, thank you for your service, just that. Like I'd been some IT janitor quietly wiping down the servers for 15 years. No mention of the fact that I'd architected our entire migration to the cloud, negotiated every vendor contract, put out every fire that would have torched lesser companies to the ground. Just a nod, like a waiter whose shift was over. Few heads turned toward me, Dana nervously. Shiv professionally blank, and Ken finally lifting his eyes just long enough to whisper shit without moving his lips. I stood up slowly. I didn't say a word. I didn't throw a chair or cry or stammer something about loyalty. I just looked at Dean. The silence stretched. His eyes flicked just briefly. The smile twitched. That's when it hit me, not pain, not humiliation. Something colder, like dry ice packed under the ribs. He thought he'd gutted me. Thought he'd dropped a grenade in my lap and walked away before the pin hit the floor. But here's the thing about instincts, Dean. They remember. They catalog every missed invoice, every rushed contract renewal, every shortcut you took while calling yourself strategic. They know where the dead wires run beneath your polished concrete floors. And they do not forget. I grabbed my notepad, empty, symbolic, clicked the pen once, slid both into my tote bag with the same care I'd use packing explosives. When I turned to go, the only sound was the faint squeak of my flats against the polished laminate. I didn't look back. Let them stare. Let them wonder whether I'd cracked, combusted, or combusted internally. Because the truth was, I hadn't even started. I wasn't walking out broken. I was walking out with something they hadn't noticed, a key they forgot I still held. HR had the nerve to make it feel like a graduation party. 15 years, chirped Marlene, the director of People Ops, sliding a branded tote bag across the table like it was a damn prize. We're so grateful for your contributions, Ellie, truly. So many memories. She said memories the way a dentist says you're going to feel some pressure. Her voice was chipper, like she was reading a script written by someone who's never worked past 5 p.m. Tote contained a novelty mug, a dusty fleece from 3 logos ago, and a letter on letterhead thanking me for innovative service and loyalty. My name was spelled wrong. I glanced at the termination paperwork, generic NDA, non-compete boilerplate, and the offboarding checklist. They'd printed the template, didn't even update it. It still listed the VPN we decommissioned in 2021. I'd like to confirm access revocations, I said. Calm. Civil. Like I wasn't imagining setting their printer on fire with my eyes. Specifically anything tied to infrastructure controls. Admin keys. Vault access. Marlene blinked at me, then looked down at the checklist like she just remembered it was in her hands. Oh, I believe IT handles all that. Standard protocol. It's automated. Automated, of course. We've already processed your email deactivation, she added. That was the same as deactivating the system heart monitor I helped build from scratch. But feel free to send any follow-ups through your personal address if needed. I almost laughed. My personal address. Like I'd be sending thank you notes. Also, she continued brightly, can we count on you for an exit interview next week? It's anonymous, promise. I'm not anonymous, I said. I'm terminated. Marlene's smile wilted slightly. She handed me the form anyway. Badge was supposed to be turned in, but no one asked. The scanner on the HR door beeped green as I walked out. I paused, looked back through the glass. No one noticed. No one cared. Downstairs, I passed through the lobby, then into the employee parking structure. My access card still opened the gate. I stared at the blinking green light like it was a ghost waving hello. Once inside my car, I opened my laptop. Still logged in. VPN active. Slack grayed out. Jira alive. Our documentation platform wide open. Vault password unchanged. I closed the lid. Not to cover my tracks, there were none. Just to sit with it for a moment. They'd severed the limb but left the nerve endings attached. 15 years, and the offboarding process was so sloppy it couldn't even find the plug to pull. That's the thing with infrastructure. You don't see it until it breaks. Or until someone who understands it chooses to stop fixing it. They thought they cut me out clean, but they forgot the rot under the paint. Forgot I was the one who built the damn walls. I went home, changed into sweatpants, nuked leftover lo mein, and watched reruns of a crime procedural I couldn't focus on. My mind kept circling back to the badge in my purse. The one that still blinked green. It should have felt like closure. Instead, it felt like an invitation. One they didn't know they'd sent. They'd offboarded the body. But the access was still mine. It was 3 years ago, middle of July, and the office AC was doing that thing where it gasped like an asthmatic and gave up entirely by noon. Everyone was melting in mesh chairs, trying to pretend they weren't Googling early signs of heat stroke between Slack messages. The migration deadline loomed like a guillotine. The old server farm was buckling under patchwork solutions and weekend hotfixes, and I'd finally convinced leadership, after 2 years of bloodletting PowerPoints and backroom strategy haggling, to move the entire infrastructure to the cloud. Problem was, none of them understood the fine print. To them, cloud architecture might as well have been black magic wrapped in acronyms. But to me, it was home. I lived in the footnotes of those contracts. I knew which vendors charged by CPU spike versus bandwidth. I knew which availability zones flinched during thunderstorm season, knew how to hide redundancy beneath clean dashboards, so no VP would ever notice we were paying for backups they'd have axed in a cost review. And I knew one thing above all. If anyone else tried to manage this migration, we'd be dead in 6 weeks. So I wrote the contracts. Personally, no delegation. No interns parsing SLA bullet points. Every clause was mine. And there, buried on page 42 of the Primary Cloud Services Agreement, right under a section titled Emergency Provisioning Authority, was the clause, the designated migration lead E. Kincaid shall retain full administrative rights and override privileges for the duration of the service contract to ensure continuity during any provisioning, rollback, or incident recovery process. Simple, boring, bureaucratic camouflage. But it meant this: for as long as that contract lived, I was the god-tier admin. Irrevocable, not unless they amended it, not unless they even noticed it, which, of course, they didn't. No one asked questions during the migration. They just wanted results, and I gave them results. We hit 99.999% uptime within the first month. Latency dropped by half. Billing stabilized because I played the pricing tiers like a damn fiddle. We went from firefighting to a hum. A quiet, stable hum, and the execs, they forgot I ever existed. Infrastructure only matters when it fails. And because I'd made sure it didn't, they redirected their attention to shinier things, new product launches, acquisition rumors, that doomed rebranding initiative with the lowercase logo everyone hated. But I remembered. I remembered the late nights elbow deep in YAML files while Dean bragged at industry mixers. I remembered bypassing legal to get a dev environment spun up in Singapore because they couldn't grasp time zone redundancy. I remembered when the CFO sent back a budget with cut 15% scrawled across it in red Sharpie, right after I saved the company $300K in back-end licensing. And I remembered the clause. I even checked in on it last year, curious. Same contract, same untouched appendix. My name still nestled in legal stone, wrapped in the kind of language that puts junior counsel to sleep. It had survived 3 procurement reviews, 2 CTO, 1 acquisition rumor. No one ever updated it, no one even read it. And now, as I sat cross-legged on my living room floor with a bowl of Cheerios and my laptop open to the admin dashboard, it was still there. My name, my authority, my access. They had fired me, but they hadn't buried the landmine, and I was the only one who knew exactly where it was. Dean was in his element now, circling the bloodied waters, clearing house like a Wall Street shark on a keto cleanse. The layoffs came in waves. First, it was the data ops folks, quiet, capable people who never missed a deadline but didn't add visible velocity to the roadmap. Then, it was the two senior engineers who'd held the CI/CD pipelines together with spit and tribal memory. After that, the budget analysts who used to flag his little rounding errors in quarterly reports. Gone, all while Dean strutted around like he was Moses parting the Red Sea of inefficiency. "We're lean now," he said during the all-hands. "No more bloat, no more gut feelings. We make decisions based on metrics, not emotions." Someone clapped. Someone always does. I watched the recording from my living room in a hoodie with takeout curry and a cat asleep on my ankle. Irony was thick enough to spread on toast. The man who didn't understand how SSO worked was now redefining operational discipline. A few days later, word leaked that he delayed the internal compliance audit by at least a quarter. Reason? Vendor fatigue, which is CFO speak for I don't want to answer hard questions about access controls I don't understand. There were rumblings in the Slack screenshots I still had back-channel access to, worry from mid-level engineers, confusion from product managers, outright fear from the lone dev SecOps guy who was now being asked to streamline certificate renewals without admin permissions. I could have stepped in. I could have made one phone call and spared them the mess. But I didn't. Instead, I went to LinkedIn. My profile had been dormant since 2019. No flashy buzzwords. No career coach headline about driving scalable impact. Just Ellie Kincaid, systems infrastructure, consultant. I added a banner photo of a blank terminal screen. Clean, unnerving, honest, and then I waited. The first ping came in 2 days later from a vendor rep I used to spar with over back-end billing thresholds. His message was polite but cautious. "Hey Ellie, saw your consulting now. Curious if you're open to quick contract work. Different org, same tech stack. You'd get it." Then came another. Someone from our disaster recovery provider, and someone from a procurement firm we used to partner with before Dean severed the contract citing bloat. Each message was careful, tethered with just enough plausible deniability. But the subtext was loud and clear. They trusted me. They didn't trust him. I didn't gloat. Didn't reply to most of them right away. Just read them slowly, one by one, while sipping black coffee and listening to the sound of nothing falling apart for once. 'Cause here's what Dean never understood. Infrastructure isn't sexy. It's not an investor slide or a lunchable slogan. It's not something you brag about over cocktails. It's wires and dependencies and quiet people making miracles out of garbage timelines. And when you fire those people, the wires fray. The dependencies rot, the miracles stop. But me, I was still intact, still logged in, still patient. A shark doesn't thrash, doesn't bite on impulse. It waits, strikes once, precisely, and I was almost ready, not quite, just circling. The message came through at 11:42 p.m. on a Thursday. Slack ping, from an account I recognized, Jonas R., a mid-level engineer who used to drink too much yerba mate and call every outage a learning opportunity. Smart kid, bit jumpy. Still had a conscience, which was probably why he couldn't sleep. "Hey, sorry to bother you. Weird question. You remember who has final authority for the infrastructure provisioning contract? We're prepping for the audit and no one's sure." I stared at the message for a while, not because I was surprised, but because it was finally happening. The static in the wires, the ripple across the comm surface. I typed slowly, deliberately. "Check the doc vault, look for Amendment 14. That was it. One sentence. No emojis, no follow-up. I knew what he'd find. Back when we were drafting the master services agreement for the cloud migration, legal made the brilliant decision to store all revisions in a secure document vault, separate from the main contract repository. Why? Because no one wanted version conflicts. Legal's idea of future-proofing was burying the past 6 feet under folder trees named Do Not Edit Final v2. Amendment 14 lived in that vault, tucked inside a zip file, behind 2 permissions firewalls, and mislabeled as a temporary provisioning addendum. It was never indexed properly. Hell, it didn't even show up in the procurement team's spreadsheet. But it was signed. By me and by legal. and by the then CTO, and it was active. I could picture Jonas opening it now, eyebrows tightening, posture shifting, sick realization blooming in his stomach as he scanned the line that mattered. Administrative control and override access shall remain with the migration lead E. Kincaid throughout the duration of the service agreement, unless formally revoked via signed amendment and vendor acknowledgement. That amendment had never been revoked, because no one had thought to check, because Dean had assumed the contracts were just paperwork, not landmines. I didn't expect a reply. One came anyway 15 minutes later. Holy shit. I closed the tab and slid my laptop aside. Outside, the city hummed faintly, low and indifferent. Inside, my apartment was quiet, the only light coming from the fridge left ajar. I hadn't moved since dinner. Cold pad thai, half-eaten, sat next to a legal pad covered in notes I hadn't needed to reference. Jonas wasn't going to sound the alarm. He didn't have the rank. He'd flag it quietly, maybe mention it to his manager, who'd forward it to someone in legal, who'd escalate to finance. Which meant eventually Dean would see it, or worse, he wouldn't, which was fine by me. The fuse had been touched. No explosion yet, but the heat had begun to travel down the wire. They hadn't remembered me. They'd remembered my shadow. And now it was stretching back across their clean dashboards and hollow KPIs like a ghost with receipts. It was the kind of night that smelled like static, humid, still, and too quiet for a city this size. I was barefoot, wrapped in an old college hoodie with sleeves too long, pacing between the kitchen and my laptop like I was waiting for something that had already happened. The audit was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. They'd booked an external firm, big name, all business, clipboard and compliance types who wore badge lanyards like stethoscopes, kind that didn't care about company lore or whose name was on what door. They cared about signatures, authority, access logs, contracts. I sat down at the table. My laptop was already open, cursor blinking patiently on the admin dashboard login. Two-factor kicked in. One code to my backup email. Another to the phone I'd registered 3 years ago under a throwaway Google Voice number tied to a procurement sandbox nobody had ever touched again. Access granted. Interface loaded slowly, probably throttling. Dean had optimized bandwidth costs recently by switching tiers. There it was. Provisioning controls right arrow platform authority, right arrow primary admin name. E. Kincaid role, full override plus compliance superuser, per Amendment 14, expiration. /I didn't smile. Didn't feel triumphant. Just stared at the screen like I was reading an obituary that hadn't been published yet. The timestamp on the signature was still clean. No log activity since I'd last checked. No one had touched it. No one had revoked it. No one had even tried. And now, there was nothing to change, nothing to tweak. The beauty of a perfect trap is that you don't need to add springs or sharpen spikes. You just leave it open, unassuming, and wait. I closed the tab. I walked to the kitchen, boiled water, deeped a bag of Earl Grey in a chipped mug I'd been meaning to throw out for 6 years. Something about the ritual helped. The warmth, the stillness. My hands didn't shake. Then I opened my drafts folder. The email had already been written, scheduled days ago, like a will notarized in advance. Subject, provisioning metadata compliance anchor to audit at redacted firmcom attachments. Contract Amendment 14. PDF, access logs, EK full auth CSV, admin role verification TXT message. Per your request for current provisioning authorities, as part of tomorrow's audit, attached are documents confirming the still active administrative contract, executed 3 years ago during the platform migration, and associated access logs. No changes have been made to this record by the current executive team. Please confirm receipt at your convenience. EK. I scheduled it for 7:01 a.m., 1 minute past the start of their audit prep, early enough that it would arrive at the top of their inbox. Time-stamped, traceable, undeniable. Click, scheduled, done. I closed the laptop and stared at my tea. Steam curled up in thin ribbons, quiet and slow. I watched it for a while, then leaned back and exhaled, not relief, not gloating, something more final. I had lit the fuse. Now all that was left was the wait. The conference room on 27 looked like a murder scene, gleaming surfaces, open laptops, half-drunk coffee cups, and the slow suffocation of executive confidence. The auditors arrived at 8:47 a.m. sharp. 3 of them. Black suits, black shoes, black expressions. One had a hard case that looked like it could hold a defibrillator or a contract printer. Either way, Someone was getting shocked. Dean greeted them like a man hosting a dinner party at a house he didn't own. All teeth and recycled metaphors. We've trimmed the fat. What you're looking at now is a clean, responsive infrastructure with no excess noise. Just signal. The lead auditor, woman in her 50s with glacier eyes and a voice that probably made interns cry, nodded once. She didn't open her laptop. She pulled out a checklist and a pen. Let's begin with Cloud Provisioning Authority logs, she said. Dean gestured toward the new director of DevOps, a guy who'd been with the company maybe 6 months and still had the kind of tan that said, "I own a boat, not experience." He stammered a quick "sure, let me pull that up," and started typing with a speed that betrayed panic. They waited. He tried again. "Just give us a moment, pulling up the central provisioning console now." Click, pause, refresh, click again. And then, the projector screen, error 403, insufficient privileges. Silence. The DevOps guy blinked. That shouldn't be happening. Hang on, let me try from the vault access side. Error, credential chain unresolved. Contact primary admin. Dean cleared his throat. Must be a session timeout, or the auditor raised one finger. Just one. He stopped talking. "We'll need the service contract and all amendments related to provisioning authority," she said. "Sure, our legal team can. We've already requested it from your systems." 10 seconds later, her associate slid a printed contract across the table. Old watermark, legal header from 3 years ago, highlighted section in neon yellow. Administrative control and override access shall remain with the migration lead E. Kincaid? Dean didn't speak. His jaw shifted slightly, as if he was adjusting an invisible tie that had just turned into a noose. DevOps guy coughed into his sleeve and leaned over. "Who's E? Kincaid?" The auditor looked at Dean. "Well," she asked, pen poised. Dean hesitated. "Former VP," he said. "She was let go." The auditor made a note. "And you didn't revoke this authority?" Dean's voice went thin. "We assumed our internal checklist IT handles, you assumed." She said it flat, not a question. A verdict. They pulled the access logs next. And there it was, no activity from me for months, just a single login timestamp the night before. No changes. No interference, just a presence. And that's when the real bloodletting began. The audit clock stopped. The projector dimmed. 2 of the auditors stood up and left the room. The third, glacier eyes, remained seated, tapping her pen against the folder. "This constitutes a material failure in access governance," she said quietly. Dean was pale now, not angry, not indignant, just pale, kind of pale that comes right before a financial hemorrhage. "Who else knows about this?" he asked. "We do," she said. "And after this report, so will your board." He sat down, finally, like the floor gave out beneath him. And somewhere across town, I finished my tea and opened a new tab. The match was struck. Now the whole room was starting to burn. Dean was summoned like a child called to the principal's office. He tried to maintain the predator swagger, jacket unbuttoned, hands in pockets, a half smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, but it didn't stick. You could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted left and right like a man counting exits. He walked into the glass-walled audit room pretending to own the building. He left that room knowing he didn't even own his own mistake. I wasn't there, didn't have to be, but people talk. It started with a whisper through Slack channels, passed from desk to desk like a flare in the dark. "Something's going down on 27. One of the HR assistants saw the auditors roll out the big binders. Another said she heard someone from legal curse under their breath. Rare, considering they usually speak in red lines and plausible deniability. Inside the room, it was quiet. Just the lead auditor, 2 of her associates, and Dean, sweating lightly under LED lights that made everything feel clinical. On the table, a single page. No cover sheet, no fluff. Just one clause, one name. The auditor tapped it once with her pen. Nothing theatrical, just a soft, decisive click. "We have one authorized signature for this platform," she said, voice like snow melting on stone. Dean leaned in, his brow furrowed. His lips moved as he read it once, then again. You could almost hear the gears trying to jam themselves in reverse. E. Kincaid, that name in block print. Ghost written in ink and contract law. He froze. Time slowed. One of the associates turned a laptop around to show the access logs, still live on the screen. Another brought up the compliance dashboard, still bound to her credentials, still locked to her authority, still hers. Dean swallowed, blinked. His mouth opened slightly, like maybe he had a clever spin queued up, a rationalization, a scapegoat, a process improvement opportunity. But nothing came out. Then, behind the glass, someone watching from the bullpen whispered it. Ellie, like an incantation, like a curse, not loud, but loud enough. Others heard. Heads turned. Her name rippled outward like a dropped pebble in a still lake, echoes bouncing off egos, climbing past titles, threading through every desk that used to rely on her steady silence to keep the lights on and the servers warm. In the audit room, Dean looked up from the page like he'd just remembered gravity existed. This wasn't supposed to, the auditor raised a brow. You signed off on system streamlining. You assured our team access controls were fully transitioned. You insisted no legacy roles remained. Dean didn't answer, because there was no answer. Just a ticking silence that stretched too long. The auditor closed the folder. Her tone didn't rise, didn't change, just grew heavier. This failure of governance puts you at direct risk of a board-level violation. Your controls were performative, not functional. Dean's fingers curled slightly on the table, and just like that, the shark had his jaw wired shut. No more smiles, no more metaphors, just one name, one clause, one mistake that wasn't supposed to exist but had been waiting. The cicadas were humming like power lines, hot and relentless. I sat on the porch with my bare feet propped against the rail, one hand wrapped around a chipped mug, the other scrolling slowly through a contract on my tablet. Digital ink still fresh, signature line glowing blue. 12-month retainer. 6 figures. No micromanagement, no Monday stand-ups, no CFOs in sharkskin suits pretending they understood provisioning thresholds. Vendor name, Grayson Net Infrastructure Solutions. The same vendor Dean tried to bully into renegotiating rates 2 years ago. Said they were bloated, complacent, and lucky to be on our roadmap. I'd stepped in quietly, fixed the relationship, built the API handshake myself when the junior dev flubbed the credentials. Apparently, they remembered. The contract had been sitting in my inbox since that morning, timestamped 7:16 a.m., barely 15 minutes after my scheduled email detonated in Dean's face. I didn't reach out, didn't pitch. They came to me. Because when the walls start creaking, people remember who built the beams. A breeze kicked up across the porch, lifting the corner of the contract on my lap. I pressed it down with the same calm certainty I'd used signing Amendment 14. Everything felt circular. Clean. I wasn't elated. I wasn't smug. Just done. My phone buzzed beside the mug. Jonah's. Did you see what just happened to Atrix? Atrix. The company that forgot I was still holding the fuse. I glanced up at the trees across the street, watched a squirrel fling itself from branch to branch with a kind of blind confidence I recognized. Then I replied. Just one emoji, shark no follow-up, no explanation. It was enough. Somewhere across town, maybe still in that same audit room, Dean was sitting alone now. Legal had left. The auditors had stepped out to prepare their statement. The blinds were still open, casting a long slice of late afternoon sun across the table like a spotlight nobody wanted. In front of him, that single page. The clause, the name. He'd read it 10 times by now, trying to find the loophole. The typo, the out, there wasn't one. Because sentiment isn't weakness. Instinct isn't fluff. And governance, real governance, starts with someone who gives a damn before the metrics demand it. He thought he was cutting fat, but he'd severed the artery. He didn't see the oxygen until I unplugged it. And now he gets to sit there. Not ruined, not fired yet, just recognizing that the thing he dismissed, the quiet operator, the sentimental instinct, the woman he thanked like she was a barista who got his name wrong, had been the only reason the whole thing didn't fall apart sooner. I closed the tablet, sipped my tea, the wind shifted, and in the quiet, you could almost hear it. Collapse doesn't always roar. Sometimes it exhales. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive